Hello everybody, Richard here. Today we're going to go and show you how to make some homemade country style bread. We're going to go shop for the ingredients. Simple stuff, come home, put it all together, and bake that loaf. Let's go. Hello everybody, we're back from our shopping trip. We have the salt, we have the olive oil, the extra virgin olive oil, and extra virgin means that it's the first pressing of the olives without using any heat. So they actually press the olives and they extract this great golden liquid that has a lot of flavor and it's great for cooking, especially in bread as well. The flour is the unbleached flour, and by unbleached that means that it hasn't been bleached. It hasn't been made white. So this is good. One step less that is done to it keeps it that much better for you. And then we have the actual dry yeast over here. We have the dry yeast that we're going to use. This is the live organism that will make the bread expand and bubble up. Okay, so we're going to start by adding all the ingredients. You can use regular tap water, which I like to do. Now, different tap waters, depending upon what part of the country you're in, some cities have really good water, some cities have really bad water. We're in Round Rock, Texas today, and this water has a little bit of a flavor to it, but nevertheless, the city water has to meet certain qualifications, so it's not that big of a deal. But anyway, here we go. So you're going to use about, I would say, about 2 coffee cups of water, warm water. Can't be too hot, because if it's too hot, your yeast will not rise, because you will kill your yeast. It doesn't like to be too hot. So then you put a couple of, what is this? A teaspoon, 2 teaspoonfuls of yeast. Okay. And this is going to be done pretty quickly. If you want to, if you have the time and the luxury, you can just, let it just sit there and soften up. And as you can tell, it's already softening up, so that's pretty quick because of the warm water. And you mix it up a little bit to get all the goodness going here. Okay, so after that, you're going to add a little bit of salt. I would say about a teaspoon of it. And then you're going to add some extra virgin olive oil. Now, if you don't add olive oil, the bread comes out a bit more crunchy. The olive oil helps to keep it fresh longer, so that's a good thing. If you want to have the bread fresh longer, if you're gonna have guests over, you can put the olive oil or not. So depends upon how long you want the bread to last. So here you have all the water, olive oil, salt, and yeast. And the last thing you're going to put in there would be the flour. Now, flour is a funny thing. Flour acts a lot like a mop, okay? It absorbs liquid. It may not seem like that by looking at it because it's so powdery, but it really does. And what causes the flour to determine if it's really moist or not is the actual atmosphere where you live. So here in Round Rock, Texas, it's pretty humid. We just got through going through some rainstorms here. So it really is humid. So that might make an influence on how wet this dough is. So we're going to get something to mix this thing. You mix it. You combine it. And it will start off looking like cake batter. And that's good, because you don't want to pour all of your flour in at one time, because if you do that, it'll seize up. It'll get really hard to work with. And that way you have more control over how much flour goes in there and the consistency of your flour. So after it looks kind of like pancake batter, you want to add some more. And of course, the more flour you add, the bigger the loaf's going to be. And the more dense it's going to be. Now, you know, this reminds me of my great-grandmother, Concepcion. I grew up in southern New Mexico, and she would always make bread in the middle of wintertime. And the house would smell like my great-grandma's house. And that's where I liked, or grew to like, making bread. I mean, to me, she was an artist. I mean, she knew what she was doing. So that's where I get my inspiration for making bread. So just go through this until you get to the point where I will show you where the flour doesn't look like cottage cheese. Okay. Now, if you're making ciabatta, which is the Italian bread, you want an extremely wet dough. But here we're making country bread, country style. I mean, this is nothing fancy. Actually, it's kind of homey, kind of country, kind of wild type thing, you know, because, I mean, you're not after a beautiful loaf. You're just after a rustic loaf that may end up getting a little bit singed on one end, and maybe not. But the point that the thing you're after here is that you're going after flavor, okay? Now, if you were to just make your dough and put it straight in the oven, well, you're not going to have much flavor, but you're going to have a very hard piece of bread, and you don't want that. Unless you do want that. I don't know. So here, when the mixing stick gets a little bit hard, a little bit of resistance to it, you see what it looks like? See, it's pulled away from the sides of the bowl. That means it wants to get out. So that's ready to come out. And now we're going to go from the bowl to the top of the counter. So in order for the flour not to stick to the top of the counter, we're going to sprinkle the flour on the top here. And what that does, it acts like a little barrier between the wet dough and the dough itself. So then, don't be afraid of the dough. I mean, you won't hurt it. Actually, the more you abuse it, the more it likes it. Because what you're doing is you're actually creating what they call gluten. And gluten is what makes the bread dough so stretchy. And that's good because you want the dough to stretch. You want that dough to grow like a gigantic bubble of goodness. Okay, so we're done with that. And you know, don't be afraid to get dough on your fingers. It's kind of fun actually if you do that. So here you start working it like this. You know, you're making up your mind where you want that dough to go. And you can see it changing right before your eyes. Because what's happening is that when you move it around, your hands are kind of like chewing this thing. And what you're doing when you do this is you are developing the gluten. Everybody say gluten. Gluten. And that gluten helps the dough to stretch when the yeast starts eating the little pieces of flour in there. And it creates gas, and it makes this thing expand. So, there you have it. How simple was that? Now, and so after you do this, you need about another couple of minutes to make sure you have that yeast awake in there and moving around and figuring what's going on. After you do this, you see that? Isn't that great? I mean, to me, buying a loaf of bread that looks like say you go to Whole Foods or some other place, whatever natural store you may have in your city or country, you look at the loaves of bread on the shelf and you go, wow, that looks great. That you must be like, you know, an artist. It must be so hard to get that bread to look like that. Well, it's not. As you can see, there it is. That's why you call it a country loaf, because you don't have any beautiful, perfectly round shape. You have a little mole over here, a little flour mole. You can just work it in, you know. And So now we're just going to put it back in the bowl that we took it out of. And then, after we kneaded the heck out of this piece of dough, we're going to let it rest for about 2 hours until it doubles in size. When it doubles in size, you'll come back to it, and the smell coming out of it is great. That's where all the flavor comes. The longer you let this dough set, the more flavor it develops. So we'll let this sleep, rest, for as long as it takes to double in size, and then we'll come back and we'll punch it down again, shape it, stick it in the pan, let it rise again, and then we'll stick it in the oven. So, be back in a minute. All right, it's been a while. The bread dough has risen. It has risen. So, what happens now, let me just show you this. There it is. It's almost tripled in size, actually. So, it starts to cave in. Yeah. So now what you want to do is you want to put some flour on your hands so you won't get all this dough. And then you just go poke, poke, poke. A little bit more. And what you're going to do, you're going to take it out of the bowl. See that? It's coming out. And like I said, bread dough is very forgiving. You know, it's kind of like God. You can beat it down and it still comes back up. It rises again. And it's actually really good for you. So, and you dump it out. And don't be afraid, because you will not hurt the dough. The yeast won't get upset. So, you know. And I try and get as much of the dough out of the bowl as possible. Sometimes if I'm really on a bread making binge, experimenting with bread, I keep some of this in the pan and just add more water and more yeast to it, and you're on your way again for another loaf of great bread. I mean, you can keep this going for, gosh, I don't know, 100 years. I don't know. I mean, it can go on as long as you keep feeding. Look at that. That's nice. Okay. As long as you keep feeding the yeast new flour, which the yeast is actually eating the dough, the flour. Okay? And the byproduct of that buffeting is the dough rising up. So really, since we're making country bread, it doesn't have to look like a work of art. And of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So something really beautiful could be really ugly to somebody. So the point here is that we're making country bread. You know, country folk, we're not fancy people. Well, bread can be fancy, and it can also be pretty country, which in itself is actually still pretty fancy. So, okay, so I don't usually make a loaf that's long like this. I make it round. But hey, there's always something new to try all the time. So I just got to get this. I just like to feel the dough. That's pretty much it. So anyway, because I don't know, it's like, you know, it takes you back to when the Egyptians were making dough and they were just having a great time. Kind of like what I am right now, I guess, right? So yeah, I mean, if you look at this, look at this. This is like wonderful. I mean, the bread of life. Just wonderful stuff. So what you do is, my daughter-in-law has these non-stick pans, and they are great. I mean, you could go, if you live in a place where there's a lot of snow, if you have a pan big enough, use the pan and go sliding down the mountain, because this stuff here, nothing will stick to it. Nothing. And that's what you need, because you don't want your bread to stick to the pan, because you will have to have a shovel to loosen it, and that's not good. So anyway, so just to be safe, a little blessing of the powder of the flour there, and then what we're going to do is you're just going to lay it out, man. I mean, hey, kaboom, there it is, and let it rise again. So that's pretty much it for now. Usually the second rise doesn't take quite as long as the first rise, So we're just going to put this on the side and let the yeast do its job. After you knead the dough the second time, you want to set your oven, okay? Because the point here is that you want to get the oven up to the temperature at the same time that your bread is ready to go in the oven. So you don't want to be heating the house up with an oven and the bread is rising really slowly and you're not ready. So anyway, so what you want to do, the secret here of getting this dough to rise to an incredible length and to blossom is that you want to use a very high temperature, okay? At least 400 degrees, 450, 400 degrees, something like that. And this is why. When the dough goes in the oven raw and it encounters at high heat, it makes the yeast go crazy, and and all the gases that makes the dough rise pushes up the dough. And as it's baking, it's rising even more, and you will see what a crazy thing happens. It grows and it turns really nicely brown and crunchy. So set the oven between 400 and 450 degrees right after you knead down the dough the second time. Okay, time has passed and now comes a revealing of the bread that is ready to go into the oven. So the second rising is a lot faster than the first rising because the yeast has gone all through the bread and it's pushing everything up and just having a great time. So before you put it in that 450 degree oven, you want to slice the top kind of deep because when it goes in the oven, it's going to rise so fast that the bread is going to expand and open up. Okay, that's what happens when you see the bread in the stores, that they have like knife marks through it. Some of them have checkerboard, some of them have stripes, maybe some have stars, I don't know. But the trick there is to use a very sharp knife, and don't be afraid if your dough collapses, it's no big deal, because in the oven the heat is going to make it rise back up. It will rise again. So really, like I said, the dough is very forgiving, and it doesn't have to look like a picture ready for the magazine. But you just slice it up. Slice it. Slice, slice, slice. And that's pretty much it. And then you put it in the oven like that. Oh yeah. The final countdown has begun. Okay, the bread is ready to come out of the oven. And what this is for, this is, it could be a cookie rack, but the idea behind this is that you don't want your bread to sit directly flat on a surface, because when it's cooling, it'll tend to sweat and the bottom will get soggy. So what this is for is to allow the air to move below the bread and keep it all nice and crispy and good. So we're going to look at the oven, look at the bread in the oven, and we're going to pull it out and see what miracle has happened. Look at that. Huh? Looks like a golden pillow. So what you do is you just do that. And you let it cool off. I would let it cool off at least an hour, because if you try slicing it now, you'll just smash it. So you want it to cool down, relax, coming out of a 450 degree oven. And then after that's over, you could slice it. And the way you tell it's done is usually you can leave it in the oven for like at 450 degrees for about maybe 30 to 45 minutes, depending upon how dark you want the crust to be. If you were to have used a little bit of milk in addition to the water, you would get a darker crust. So as you can see, this crust is like a blondish brown, okay? Really nice. It isn't too dark, but still, 30 to 45 minutes, and it will come out like that. Let it cool off for at least an hour, and then we'll slice it. We've made the pesto for it, and that's pretty much it. All right, it's all done. We have the bread that we worked on, we have the pesto, and we have the hummus. So, you know, to me, it's all worth the effort, because when you make everything yourself, you know what's in this stuff. At the stores, who knows what's in this stuff? Not that it's a bad thing, but you know what's in this stuff. This is as close to nature as you possibly can if you live in a city or whatever. But when it's all done, you know, eat slow. Enjoy it.